Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. Thank you so much, Portia, for coming on today's show. Even just in the few minutes that I got to know you a little bit before we started recording, I can tell that you have a lot to add to this conversation of grief. So thank you.
Well, Kalila, I extend my gratitude to be here. I'm always excited to talk about grief and to, in a sense, build community, because I never thought that I would have built so much community around grief. You know, that's something that we don't talk about either, is how you tend to unintentionally find your tribe when you're not really looking. So I'm really excited.
100%. And I think it's very telling the way that you just said that, because you said you're excited to talk about grief, and it's something that most people will be like, "What? Why are you excited? That's so strange." But I agree with you. I think bringing it to the forefront of the conversation is so healing, not just for myself, but for so many other people. So I very much appreciate the way that you brought the excitement to it. Um, Go back to when we first started talking and tell me a little bit about how you got into this world of discussing grief.
Well, Kalila, I'll give you the shortened version so we don't last all the way until 2025. But my grief journey really started in March of 2017. And when I think back to that time, that was when I had my dream job as a TV producer. And that pivot in my life, that devastation of having to let that dream job go because of my mental health, being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and, being on a cocktail of medication. I mean, people don't think about the grief that you experience from getting a diagnosis,
Hmm.
from not being amongst your talk about community, right? I was 1,000 miles away from my nucleus support system, my
Right.
mom, my granny, my siblings. And so it wasn't like I could just go next door and get a hug from them and they say everything's okay, all better. No,
Right.
I had to make time to go and visit them. And so when I think back to that time, all the grief that I was experiencing even prior to me letting go of my dream job, a lot of people don't think about that.
Hmm.
And so when I made the decision to let go of that dream job, it was like, you go through that kind of like bargaining period, right? Like, did I make the right decision? Should I go back? But I knew if I went back, it would have killed me. I mean, I almost ended my own life by suicide the month before I left the
Wow.
TV career. So it was the best decision that I needed to make at that time. And then fast forward to now, we are currently in 2024, where within that time frame of 2017 all the way until now, I've lost my great grandmother. I've buried both of my parents, my mother and my father. I've buried also friends of mine and also other close family friends who have been like aunts and uncles to me.
Hmm.
So I'm no stranger to grief, but when I think about the grief journey that really hit me hard, Kalila, was my mom. My mom made her transition July 7th of 2022.
Hmm.
And I remember the day of her transition like it was yesterday. I was sitting in the kitchen and I was listening to an audio book. I was listening to Jessica Simpson's book, Open Book. And one of the things that she said at the very end of the book is it's through our toughest moments where we find our greatest strength. And I didn't realize at that time that this would be one of those moments where I'd have to really lean in on my toughness, lean in
Hmm.
on my strength. And so I got the phone call from the hospital because we only live 5 minutes or so from the hospital that my mom
Hmm.
was at. And they told me my mom's oxygen level wouldn't go above 70. And I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision, Kalila, like, okay, if this is the route that we're going, all
Hmm.
right.
That
So
is
as I'm,
probably one of the hardest decisions anybody ever has to make.
yeah, yeah. And I remember as I made my way up to the hospital, I said a prayer.
Hmm.
I did it. And by that time, when I think about it now, it's like, well, I didn't even remember that I said a prayer
Hmm.
to God. And I said, God, if it's my mom's time to go, I surrender her to you,
Hmm.
but just keep me one promise, one, that my mom can go peacefully. Because my mom, she was on, my mom had an interstitial lung condition that was progressive.
Okay.
And so literally it felt like she was probably drowning every single day being on oxygen because her lungs kept filling up with fluid.
Wow.
And my mom would never sleep at night because she was always afraid that she would stop breathing in her sleep.
Mhm.
And so when I got up to the hospital, Kalila, and I saw my mom, and I talked to her, I talked to the doctors and everything, and I said, okay. And I remember, talk about how just in general, the God of our understanding is so compassionate.
Mhm.
When I got there to the hospital, my primary care doctor met me in the hallway before I
Wow.
even got on the elevator to
Wow.
see my mom. And she gave me a hug. I told her everything that was going on. She said, Portia, you call me. Look, if you need anything, you just call. And I needed that, right?
Mhm.
So I go up and, see my mom, all the news from the doctors. And I said, okay. So I went on ahead and called all my family, had to call everybody. And I
Wow.
said, listen, I need all of you guys to come up here to the hospital because this may be the last time that you see your aunt. And I give my family credit, Kalila. They came up in droves. They came to
Wow.
see my mom. We got my mom to sing. We got her to laugh. We got her to dance. We
I
got her to.
love that.
It was just a celebration, right, of her, if you want to call it, before liftoff is what
Right.
I think of it as. And I remember when she opted for the morphine. Well, before she opted for the morphine drip, I got an hour with her. It was just me and her in the room by herself. And as she was talking, something told me to record our last conversation. And one of the things that I said to her was, Ma, I just want to tell you thank you for being my mother. Thank you for keeping your foot up my butt, even though it was hard. And I wouldn't want to call anybody else my mother but you. And she said to me, well, thank you, darling. Mommy's job is done.
Oh, that is so
And
special.
I remember Kalila, like, I literally watched my mom's heart stop. Like, after she opted for the morphine drip, and like, I'm just watching her in the bed, and my aunt, it was just me and my aunt in the room, and I was holding her right hand. My aunt was holding her left hand. And I remember the sunset on the day of my mom's transition. It was like out of this world, something that
Wow.
you've seen in a movie. It had every single color, and then it had even stars in it. It was beautiful.
Wow.
And I remember once she took her last breath, she transitioned on 7/7/22 at 10:10 p.m. And I remember once I saw her heart stop. This was even before the nurse came in to, like, check her pulse and stuff. Literally, Kalila, the room, excuse me, the room got this like eerily warm feeling. It,
Mhm.
it was like a heat came in the room.
Mhm.
And as I looked at my mom, I literally saw her spirit. And she waved to me and blew me a kiss, and out she went.
Wow.
Now, mind you, I don't even think my aunt saw this
Right.
because my aunt was crying. So she had her head down, but it was like the coolest experience. It's like we talk about when we bring life into the world, but there is something powerful about allowing someone to transition from this world.
100%.
And yeah, I remember like the very next day when I went out on the front porch and the sky was the same color pink
Mhm.
as my mom's robe that she wore in the hospital. And like,
It
I'm
was
going to
like
go
a
a little,
nice little hello.
well, it gets even more interesting, right? Because I told my mom before she transitioned, I was like, Mom, make sure you come visit me. And I'm not making this up. Just like how in the Bible, right? When, as we reach Easter and we talk about, Jesus's resurrection, 3 days 3 days after my mom transitioned, a monarch butterfly was smooching in my front yard. I said, you gotta be
Oh,
kidding me. Yeah.
that's awesome. It's really incredible to me that your faith seems like it carried you through not just before she had passed, but the entire time that you were having this diagnosis of bipolar and then watching your grandmother or your great grandmother you said pass away and then being able to be in the room with your mom. There there's so many aspects to you being there that just blow me away. And even if I just wanted to point out that even if your aunt was looking at your mom and not having her head down, she still might not have seen the same thing that you saw because of the fact that you were open to it and because of the fact that your faith really was there to say, you know that there is a life after this, and you know that you're helping her transition. And whatever that piece may be, you're going to watch her transition. So you could, and you did. That is beyond a gift that I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, it definitely was a gift, Kalila, because my brother wasn't in the room. My
Mm,
sister had just went to the bathroom.
mm,
So my mom knew, the right time to let go. And that's another thing, Kalila, that I forgot to bring up. I had to give my mom permission to go
mm,
because she would not. My mom was gonna hold on until the bitter end, and when I had that conversation with her an hour before she transitioned, I said, "Mommy, I got it.
mm.
Mommy, I got it. You can go."
Yeah,
And she needed that permission, right? And
yeah,
it was hard for me, but even, like I mentioned, I had already surrendered her back to God, and He
right.
kept His promise. She went peacefully.
That's amazing. Can I ask why you said your mom's transition was harder than your granny's who helped to raise you? Was it because you were in a different headspace, or do you think it had something totally different to do with it?
I think when I think about it now, Kalila, I definitely wasn't in a healthy headspace like I am now, because at that time when I had moved back home, that was May of 2018, and then
Mm,
Granny passed in June of 2018. I had just moved back from my TV career crumpling. So I was kind of in what I like to call the survivor's guilt phase, where I'm trying to figure out everything, determine who I was, start
mm,
over from scratch. So it really, at that time, I wasn't present. I was absent from my life. And
mm,
let me go back a little bit too, because I was still taking a lot of those different medications for bipolar. So I wasn't really in the right headspace.
mm.
I'm trying to figure out life all over again. And I literally felt like a zombie.
Right.
Like I felt like, that commercial that you see on YouTube. I don't know if it's still on YouTube now, but it has like the one red person and all the blue people around them to show like somebody who's depressed. They feel like they're
Yes,
in an audience of one. I don't know if they still show it on YouTube,
I
but
know what you're talking about.
that's how I felt. That's how I felt with everybody for that period of time when I moved back home in 2018.
Mm,
And I was like that until probably early 19, mid
wow.
19, where I just felt like a zombie. So to answer your question, I was definitely not in the same headspace like
Mm,
I am today, and even with my mom, which was probably a beautiful thing back then.
mm,
But now, when I think about my mom's transition, as hard as it was,
mm,
I'm glad I was present, even with my dad. My dad's was very sudden. My father transitioned for 15 to 23, and he had a heart attack.
mm,
And I was the first one to get a call about him. Now, the thing with my dad, everybody has a unique relationship with both parents.
right.
And my dad has always been a little estranged in my life. Like I've always known who he was. He
Mm,
came throughout different holidays and, events and things like that.
right.
But we had a very different relationship. And so his transition, it hurt me a little bit, because I'm like, great, I'm an adult orphan. But at the same time, when I think about it now, Kalila, his absence taught me how to be present. I had to be present for him as he
Interesting.
transitioned, and when most of the time he was absent
Right.
throughout my life. So,
Right. And you very easily could have chosen to not be there, not be present for it, and do the exact same thing. So it's a really honorable of you to say, I am going to be there. I am going to feel this. I am going to process these emotions and not just push them back and say it is what it is and I don't care.
yeah, and I didn't want to hold on to any guilt, Khalil. Like, I
Mm,
know some people, they tend to, when even before someone transitions, right? They're holding on to some level of resentment to other people, but you really have to ask yourself, who is that hurting?
Right.
Like, is that really conducive for my own life to hold on to this level of whatever anger? Or can you work to make things right in your own mind, not necessarily come kumbaya kiki with the person, right? Don't always work like that.
Right.
But I knew for me, Kalila, I didn't want that level of guilt. I wanted a clean slate,
Mhm.
because me and my father, we had been in odds for years,
Mhm.
because of how he was and how he was, in and out of our life and things like that. I knew I wanted to be the bigger person.
Right.
And that takes a lot for somebody to say that. And I was grateful because when I went to see him in the hospital, I want to say maybe a month or two before he transitioned. And my dad, he had really bad Alzheimer's dementia. So really his memory wasn't there, but he remembered who I was. And he said, "You're my child." And I waited, Kalila, 25 years to hear that.
Wow.
So for me, I got closure.
Right.
I can't speak for everybody else who knew my dad, my dad's other, children, my brother. I can't speak for them, but I know for me, I got closure
Mhm.
from that.
Do you think that because you've gone through all of these various different transitions now with your parents, your granny, friends, that you've been able to pull on the strength from processing specifically your mom's transition in terms of processing your granny's and then being able to help with your father and saying you just want to have him leave this world without any guilt, without any connection, not in a bad way, but in a way
Mhm.
that you can say, like you said, that you're not feeling this burden constantly. And then with any of your friends, have you taken the life lessons that you've learned specifically from your mom and been able to apply those in all the other ways?
I can say, Kalila, when I think now about the different people who have transitioned
Hmm.
out of my life, and some are still physically alive,
Hmm.
when I think about them and when I think about the journey that I went through with my mom, I have to a lot of times remind myself that people are seasonal, that
Interesting.
everything is seasonal.
Hmm.
Because some people, like they say, come into your life for a lifetime and some come in for a season.
Hmm.
And that can even include people who have been in your life and on your journey for 10, 20 years.
Right.
And my mom's transition really taught me how to, number one, be grateful. Number two, build resilience or reinvent my definition of what grief is and looks
Hmm.
like. Number three, it's taught me to be intentional with
Hmm.
my time, with my energy. Number four, it's given me the opportunity to evolve.
Hmm.
And what I mean by evolve is sometimes when we lose people, we stay stuck in that age level of where we experience the transition.
Yep.
And so we stop growing, we stop living, we stop pursuing what we truly want to do in this life because our person transitioned.
Hmm.
But we have to remember that their love for us is still there.
Yeah.
That love that we had with our parents, our spouse, kid, pet, whatever job, is still there. The
Hmm.
question you need to ask yourself is, how can I redirect this love energy to continue to live my life to the fullest?
Yeah.
And then the last thing is forgiveness.
Hmm.
Like, forgiving my dad was hard for me to do because my dad was not, I'll say it this way. My dad did the best he could as the father who I knew him,
Okay.
right? And each and every one of us has unique experiences with our parents. We have disagreements, that whole thing. But I'm going to give my father the benefit of the doubt and say he did the best that he knew how. And
Hmm.
that's okay.
Hmm.
Right. And I knew I didn't want to hold on to any level of hatred or unforgiveness because, right, we have to think about too, Kalila, our parents had their own traumas and their
Right.
traumas impacted how they raised us. And
Yep.
we, being aware, we have to be the ones to say, you know what, how they raised me hurt me and harm me at the same time. But am I going to use what I've learned as a crutch, or am I going to use it as a way to pay it forward and teach other people?
Yep. I, I it's such a beautiful way to put it. And I have a friend who talks about how energy tends to stay with you if it's a harder energy to process. So the harder energies that people typically think of to process are things like grief, anxiety, depression, the happy emotions, so-called, excitement and thrill and all those sorts of things pass through you very easily. But when you suppress not being able to forgive someone or holding on to the burden of somebody else's memory, or even holding on to the grief because you think that if you let go of the grief, it all of a sudden negates how much you love them or it negates their love for you, those are really hard to let go. And it's so beautifully stated the way you just said that you didn't want to be able to hold on to that. And their love for you doesn't go anywhere. It's still with you. That energy is always going to be with you. And how you then use it in whatever way you can to teach others or to teach yourself or to grow within yourself is just a beautiful way to put it. I have no other words besides that because it really is.
Well, I appreciate it, Kalila. And, I always tell people, right? Like, even now, so I've been fortunate to do several amazing things through my grief journey. Like, outside
Mm,
of speaking on shows like yours and hosting my own show, The Grief Grand Tour, I also have been able to, just by just the beauty of how life is, I've always wanted to host a grief group.
mm.
Well, through one of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, I'm the youngest host for one of their groups that they have. And so
Wow.
I host the Saturday group called
Mhm.
Brew Resilience. And in the group, the first thing that we start off with is I'm like, okay, y'all, welcome to the fun house. We are going to start off all day with gratitude. So I created a custom gratitude wheel that spins
Nice.
and it lands on a new letter every single week.
Mhm.
And so each person has to say what they're grateful for that begins with that particular letter.
I love that.
So last week, it wasn't the letter N. It wasn't the letter, it was the letter R. The letter
Okay.
R. So I said I was grateful for rest, right? Because I think we
It's a
don't
good
think
thing to be
about,
thankful for.
right? Because I mean, we're all always busy. And if we've got kids, we've got multiple projects or clients, or we've got multiple obligations.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard for us to rest. And I'm not talking about sleeping, just sitting and just doing nothing, or taking a minute to meditate or phone a friend, just resting and not being in the continuous grind.
Mhm.
Some other people said they were grateful for rain, resilience, rejuvenation. So like there's so much to be grateful for. And
Mhm.
this is what I want to help more people to recognize when they're stuck in their grief, is to find gratitude in what you have taken away or have kept from that person in the
Mhm.
form of a memory, because you're a better person whether you want to admit it or not,
Right.
from whoever transitioned in your life, whether it was that bad boyfriend or girlfriend, or that job where the boss was, Hades on wheels, and just to put it nicely, and the furry companions that you had that
Right.
tore up your favorite underwear or blanket or
Right.
whatever. We've each been given something through our grief journey. There's
Right.
so many hidden gifts. And I want to really encourage more people to seek that when they're really feeling that low point in their journey, right?
Mhm.
And just honor where you're at too. Like, I think, Khalil, there's so much on social media that tells you have to feel a certain way when you're grieving, like the 5 stages of grief. And I think they've already debunked that the 5 stages of grief do not apply to people who are grieving.
No.
And I think we have to just remind people that, number one, grief is a universal experience, but it's a personal journey.
Right.
And grief is not just the physical transition of a person, a job, a place. It's grief from the childhood you didn't have. Like,
Right.
let's say if your parents got a divorce when you were 3 years old, you remember that,
Yep.
right? So I think we're getting a little better because more people are talking about these other griefs,
Mhm.
but there's still a lot of work to do in this
Right.
space.
And I think it's really important to remember, I always say this, that you can only control your own actions, your own speech, and your own thoughts. However, you then choose to continue on with your process is your decision. And you can't let somebody else control what you do. It makes it very easy to say, well, if someone's coming at me, I couldn't help but get angry, or I couldn't help but scream, or I couldn't help but do, fill in the blank. But if you can control your own emotions and you can control what's going on in your head, then anything that comes out of your mouth is something that is a thoughtful and thought-provoking situation. And so you can learn from all the experiences that you've had to say, okay, I am feeling this emotion. And in grief, you could feel multiple emotions at one time. There was a lot of times where I was laughing hysterically and crying because I was in utter despair. At the exact same time, my daughter was looking at me
Hmm.
like, "What is wrong with you?" But at the same time, I could then gather myself and say, I'm teaching her a very valuable lesson to say that it's okay to feel your emotions. It's not okay to lash out at people, but it's okay to feel them. It's okay to express them. And then we move on.
I think you brought up a valid point, Kalila, about the duality.
Hmm.
Grief teaches you about duality of life like it's nobody's business. And I
Yep.
think we forget that we
Hmm.
can have moments where we're really sad, but also find joy in them, right?
Right.
When you talk about how our brain tends to go back to what I call the hamster wheel of shame and guilt.
Hmm.
That's because a lot of people, I think, if we learn to incorporate gratitude into our daily life, it makes it a little easier when we're experiencing heavy emotions like depression or sadness from
Right.
grief, because then we're able to really lean in on that gratitude muscle. Like I like to say, gratitude is the life jacket that helps you during seasons of grief because it truly does.
Hmm.
When we find gratitude in the person who we've had the opportunity to spend time with, in the lessons that we learned from them, in the fact that we were gifted with their presence,
Hmm.
right? And whatever we took from that. Because I think about it now, Kalila, when I think about my TV career, me making a pivot from that. Like I thought I was going to work my way up the corporate ladder and all this other stuff, but obviously that wasn't in the plan.
Right.
And at that time, you couldn't have told me that, oh, you should find gratitude. I'd probably be ready to take you out my front yard and pretend to be Mike Tyson. But, but now when I think about it, I'm grateful for that short period of time because I learned so many skills
Hmm.
during that I use now when I produce different shows for some of my clients and that.
Right.
So, truly, when we adopt an attitude of gratitude, nothing is truly lost.
Right. It's interesting that you call it the hamster wheel because I always think of it as a whirlpool. And I almost have like a Little Mermaid vision in my head where the whirlpool is just going and it's sucking everything with it. And I call it the what if cycle. And instead of getting into the what if cycle, if you can say what now and switch your attitude about it, like you said, think about the gratitude that you have and say, okay, yes, this happened. I cannot change what happened. I can only look forward and I can only change my outlook on things. And so if you can then move forward and say, what now? It makes it so much more palpable.
Hmm. And I think, Khalil, a lot of people just have to start where they're at. I
Right.
think a lot of people, what I like to call unintentionally, put themselves into a space that they're really not supposed to be in.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is if they see the 5 stages of grief, they'll look at it and think that it's supposed to be linear,
Right.
and it's not.
No.
A lot of times, grief looks like this of
Just,
you just sitting. It
yeah.
looks just like that most of the time. It's not even you crying. It's not even you lashing out in anger. A lot of times it's you sitting
Right.
because your brain is trying to, your body and brain are on two different pages.
Right.
And sometimes your body is feeling physically what your brain has not already caught up to just yet.
Hmm.
You're kind of in a fog. Cause I
Right.
remember Kalila, I remember after my mom transitioned, I had so much anger. I was not happy with God. I was not. I was ready to, I'm telling you, have a boxing match with God in my front yard.
Yeah.
And, I got to say, you know, God works in mysterious ways because I remember standing on the porch and saying I said a prayer, I said, God, I know this grief journey is going to be heavy, but I want it to be different. Send me
Hmm.
help. And he did. One of
Yeah.
my friends connected me with a therapist at the time and never met this person before. And in my eyes, I'm like, ooh, a new podcast guest because I was still hosting my show, Grew with Portia. That
Right.
was my little feeble brain, right?
Right.
Well, the minute I talked to them, they were like, so, I extend my love to you about your mom, but it sounds like you're stuck in your life and you don't know what to do now. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I don't know whether I want to live. I don't know whether I want to die. I don't know if I want to just crawl up in a ball and just
Right.
become like the mole people. Like, I don't know what
Right.
to
Hide
do.
in my
Right.
house forever and not talk to anybody ever again.
Right. And this therapist gave me homework. Now, mind you, they didn't even take me on as a client. They gave me homework and I listened.
Wow.
They literally told me you need to write an open, honest letter to God about how you feel. And the way I grew up, Kalila, I was never told that you can hold the God of your understanding accountable. That was like a
Oh,
no-no.
interesting.
That was kind of like, you spitting in front of the church and
Right.
then smearing it all over. That was like a
Right.
no-no, right?
So you're like, wait a
But
minute, I can write God a letter? Really?
right, I can hold God accountable. And yeah, I wrote God an honest letter. I said,
Mm,
I'm not happy. I don't understand. You've taken my dream job. You took my granny. You took my mom. And this was even before my dad passed away. I'm like, so what else do you want from me?
right.
What else do you want? And I literally asked God some tough questions. I'm like, do you find joy in watching people suffer?
Right.
Unless suffering means something different in your eyes. Like,
Right.
make it make sense to me. And so, Kalila, believe it or not, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep for like 2 or 3 months after my mom transitioned.
Wow.
And after I wrote that letter, I finally went to sleep. Finally went to sleep because all the anger came out.
Right.
Everything came out. And then, of course, knowing me and God have a very unique relationship. I had to write him a second letter. So I'm like, you are
You're like, I'm
going
not
to
done yet.
hear,
Hold on.
you're going to hear me, God. And those two letters, believe it or not, are in my audiobook, Finding
Oh,
Grace Within
wow.
Grief, Her Transition, My Transformation. And that's the book that I wrote 3 months after my mom transitioned
Mm,
to really challenge the societal narrative around
mm.
grief. Because I had so many people telling me, oh, your mom's gone. It's a great loss. Oh, you'll never get over it. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
You're
I'm
like, I
like,
have the rest of my life to live. Hold on.
and I couldn't believe that all of these different people who were saying this stuff to me, that was them projecting their unresolved grief
Right.
onto me. And I was like, hold the front door and let all the feral cats in. We're not doing this.
Right.
We're not.
Right.
And so my book was a response to that, really
Mm,
asking people, what if grief is not what we think? What if it's about letting go of this societal narrative and adopting our own understanding and
mm.
opening the door for us to start living again?
Right. It's so interesting because you had said that in part of what you had learned was that grief meant something different. And I wanted to ask you about that. So I'm glad that you brought that back up. I felt the same way where, first of all, I love that you had to create something because I also, when I went through a miscarriage at 16 weeks, and it was something where afterwards I had to create and I created a workbook. And I did the exact same thing where I said, I have pages in here and I want you to write a letter. I want you to write a letter either to yourself, to God, to the person that you lost, to the baby that you lost, whatever it is that you need to get out, put it on paper. And one of the things that we actually did when I was younger was we would we would get rid of it. And whether that's in a small bonfire that you have, obviously in a controlled space, no out of control fires here, or if you rip it up and throw it down the toilet, or if you do something else with it, whatever it is, you can keep it as a memento of your grief, but don't hold on to it.
Yeah, letting it, oh my God, it was so healing to
Hmm.
write that book. I mean, I did all my own everything, all the production for the book. I did all the production, everything.
That's
And
fantastic.
I mean, I recorded it in 2 days, but it was just, when I tell you, it just felt like such a weight was lifted off of me. Like I just let go of so much baggage that I was holding on to even before
Hmm.
my mom transitioned. Because I always wanted to become an author. This is why I say grief to me has such a different definition than what we think. I think grief, we need it. Grief and love are born at the same time, and
Yeah.
grief goes dormant when, obviously we're in the swing of life. But we need grief in order to really start living again,
Yep.
to start really opening the door up for us to become who we truly want to. Because if we didn't experience loss, how would we really understand love?
Yep.
If we
I
didn't
say that all the
experience
time.
gratitude, like, how would we really understand grief? And so I think more people, if they can see the duality, right, that everything has a balance,
Yep.
and that it's through our grief journey where we can really find so many hidden gifts in
Hmm.
our life, and appreciate what we've been given, and then pay it forward, right? What
Right.
we're supposed to be of service in this world, so right, like, pay it forward, and
Yep.
always remember that your story is going to be different than somebody else's, but you not sharing your story of how you overcame or whatever obstacles you encountered is hindering somebody else from being able to start dancing to the rhythm of their life again.
Right. I think that is so perfect and such a great way to end this conversation. So please tell everybody where they can find you because you've got an amazing book, obviously. You've got a fantastic podcast. So I want other people to be able to reach out and listen and read your book and be able to find you.
Well, again, Kalila, I extend my gratitude to being invited on your show. I appreciate it. So, those of you who want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at Portia the Grief Grand Tour. I'm on Facebook at Portia Booker. I'm also on LinkedIn at Portia Booker. And for those of you who don't want to look up all those things, just Google my name, Portia Booker, and you'll find me somewhere.
It comes in handy when you have a pretty unique name. Everybody who looks up Kalila, they're like, well, there's only a handful of you, so I'm going to go with the one who I think probably looks like the right one.
Yes, Portia is my real name. I did not pull it out of a magic hat today. I've been asked that before.
I'm sure. Well, Portia, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate your outlook on life and the faith that you have in not only yourself, but in the world around you and in God. And I'm so grateful that you reached out and wanted to come on.
I appreciate it, Kalila, and I can't wait to have you on my show.
I am ready anytime. Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community for those who've experienced pregnancy loss. Remember, you are not alone in your journey, and there is strength within you to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.